So if you were to bring the black share of wealth at least to the black share of the population, it would require an additional at least $10 trillion.
But if we were paid those unskilled wages at a 6% interest rate, we would have $6.2 quadrillion that we would be owed today.
Reparations is the key. The story, have black folks come and talk about what kind of hell they live and have people have to listen. Reparations will set us free.
Whose name was Nelson Bell. When we started this morning, I read the autobiography of Nelson Bell, and I shared with you that our mother told us that was Rufus Burgess. Well, he was the only man on the map, and his house was in close proximity to this museum. 1857, he has a house and he's the only person of color. Looks like my nephew standing there, smiling. Yep, he was only person of color that was listed on the map in 1857. And sadly today, this state park does not mark his land, does not say that he had a house here, and you wouldn't even know he existed had it not been for what he left for our family. He died, or better yet, they say he died in 1869. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. There are no records for any of the black pioneers that died pre-1900. But when he died in 1869, he died in January or June, I can't remember, but within 30 days, less than 30 days, they had probate. And for his probate, they said he had $600 in real estate and $1,000 in cash. The real estate, he said to have no heirs in this state. So all his land was taken. His house was to be carted away or burned. And
that's what they wrote. They wrote that.
His house was to be carted away or burned. And it sat in this proximity. When I come here today, I know that we're standing right now on our land. The state of California took this land, but there's beauty in it. Beauty is that although the authorities took it, as we get to the church, and I pull out pretty much the grand finale of this entire trip, you'll see we've got the deeds. The deeds not only to this land right here, but deeds to land where a guy by the name of H.B. Pierce had orchards. Those same orchards that my great-grandmother Josephine Burris Pierce Burgess Monroe carry the name. Well, H.B. Pierce, he was here too.
My name is Gaynell Johnson. My birth name is Gaynell Burgess.
Gaynell Burgess.
Yes.
And how are you related to the Burgess?
My great-grandfather is Rufus. My great-great-grandfather is Rufus Burgess. My grandfather was raised here in Coloma with two other brothers, Marion Burgess and Rufus Morgan Burgess. So Matt and John's grandfather is Rufus Morgan. My grandfather is Edgar Todd, and then there was another brother, Marion. Edgar Todd, who's my grandfather, had 3 children: Linda Burgess, who was my mother, Clifford Burgess, and Kenny Burgess.
All right, so we're out here today, and Can you give us understanding what we're doing out here and why it's important that we're out here today?
Well, I can tell you that in 2017, when John brought me out here, I've only heard about Coloma as a child, 5, 6, 7 years old. There is a place called Coloma that your family was from. I never been here. So when I found John and Matt, they wanted to bring my history full circle for me. So they brought me here in 2017. And the first thing we did was going to the museum. And I'm just excited to be in the museum. So I said, I'm a Burgess. My people are from here, and they was very happy to get to know us, and they sent us, or they brought us into a side room, and they started showing us all these documents, and there was my grandfather's name, and then my grandfather's address in Sacramento, and that's the address that I grew up on. So pieces started coming together in 2017, but when they gave us a tour, in my opinion, that did something to John, because when they took us to the blacksmith, and there's a picture of a black family on the wall, and the man that was giving the tour started mentioning the Monroes and not the Burgesses, and then John was saying, well, the Burgesses, they created and they said, oh, well, yeah, and that's them on the wall, and it wasn't our people. And then they took us to the Monroe house to give us a tour through the Monroe house. And then John was asking questions like, but wait a minute, this isn't the Burgess? Well, yeah, and that's a picture of them right there, and that wasn't our people. And that, it really struck a nerve with John. So ever since then, we came back home, and John has been on this road ever since. And so being here today with the support that we have, my dream and all of our dreams has come to fruition thus far.
Okay, so in your humble opinion, with the information that your family has, what do you think the likeliness is at this point in time that your family will be getting the land back in some form or fashion?
I'm very hopeful. In my humblest opinion, I'm very hopeful because the only thing that I could contribute, I had the picture of great-grandma Josephine. I had that with her name handwritten on the back. It was a black and white picture. But John and Matt had the deeds, and they had the land. They had these letters. They had everything that supports the claim. So I'm very, very, very hopeful. In my humblest opinion, very hopeful.
All right. So I know we were briefly talking before we started this interview.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about your story and kind of like, if you give the audience kind of your trials and tribulations and where you're at?
Absolutely. I was going over, how this happened. How did I come to know Matt and John? And I'm the only child from Linda Burgess. I'm the only child that she had. And Linda was, she died in 1975. And they're from Sacramento. When my grandfather moved from Coloma, they moved to Oak Park, California. Back then, Oak Park was its own city back then. And they settled on 7th Avenue in Oak Park. And they had a real nice house there. And my grandfather was married to Betty Burgess, who died in 1967. It was told to me that between 1967 and 1970, when I was born, he became a boarder somewhere else. I don't know why he kept his house on 7th Avenue, but became a boarder at 20. I was born in 1970. My mother had her own struggles and was found dead in 1975. I went to live with my grandfather and a friend of his, which I've always called her the neighbor. Her name was Johnny Mae Goodwin, and she just helped take care of me. And my grandfather did pass away in 1976. And at that point, Johnny Mae Goodwin said, I can't let this child go. I want to adopt this child and raise this child as my own. And she adopted me. Adoption was complete in 1977. But with that came seclusion for me. So I knew I was a Burgess. I knew my grandfather's name. I knew I had 2 uncles, but I'd never seen them. Very rarely. I seen Uncle Cliff sometime, Uncle Kenny sometime, but very rarely. And so my journey from 7 years old to 40 was always, who am I? And who do I belong to? And who are my people? Like, I've heard these stories of the Burgess family, and the stories I heard, they weren't too nice. And I didn't have any really positive strength to pull from that name. And I was 41 years of age. I was at the office one day, and something just told me, just put in the name Burgess in Facebook and see what happens. I put in the name Burgess, and 2 twins popped up, and they were in uniforms, like law enforcement uniforms. And what I've heard of the Burgess family, they were not in law enforcement. But I said, let me just instant message one of them, inbox one of them. I said, hello, my name is Gaynell. I know that I have an uncle named Milton, a mother named Linda, and a grandfather named Todd Burgess. I was adopted in 1975, but if you know these people, we could possibly be related. And in less than 5 minutes, Matt had responded, Milton is our father. We've already mentioned it to him. He knows who you are. And you're expected at the house this Saturday to meet all of your relatives. And I went there, and it's funny. I was raised 23, and Matt and John was raised in the South area across from Florin Road on 68th. And we shared not even 2 miles away from each other all them years, and I never even knew. And so I went and met everyone, and they gave me pictures, and they gave me history, and they gave me stories. And I have a picture of my grandfather and grandmother here in Coloma. They're on the monument looking over Coloma. I have, so much history, and I've never felt alone since. Ever since that day, my life has come full circle.
So 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay.
That's okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So have you been following the reparations here in California?
When Matt and John started talking about it, yes. Prior to then, no.
Okay. So what's your understanding of reparations? And first of all, let me ask you that question first. What is your understanding of reparations?
To give due justice to the African Americans that were done unjustly.
And then, in terms of how would you want to see like reparations? What reparations, in your opinion, what would it look like for Black?
Wow, I don't know. I just don't know. Like John was saying, we don't want to be the type of family that wants to take land from people who bought their land, right? That even if they bought it and it wasn't theirs to buy, I don't know what it would look like. I don't know if it would be in land. I don't think you could. Once we miss the window for generational wealth, how do you give that back? How do you give the ability for my mother to pass something to me and me to pass something to my children, and so on and so forth? How do you do that? And how do you put a dollar price on that? And so I just don't know, but I'm open. I'm so open.
What do you think about cash payments? Is that something that
cash spends everywhere. That's always an option. That's always an option. Of course it's an option, but how do you find a dollar amount for that?
That other Black people who might be immigrated past 1965 should be here. Like, what's your opinion?
Gosh, I don't know. That would be, I'd have to sit down and talk. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. Because some people could say, well, I was a direct descendant, third relations removed, right? Like I remember the lady who adopted me, Johnny Mae, I remember her saying when my grandfather died that he should be buried up there in Coloma. Like there's a cemetery here for just Burgesses. And I remember I'm a child, she was told he can, but not his wife Betty. And he wanted to be buried with Betty. And so they decided to bury my mother, my grandmother, and grandfather in Camellia. And no one is here at this burial site but my great-great-grandmother. So when you get to who's entitled, I won't know how to break that down. I mean, I'm third removed from my great-great-grandfather. Will my entitlement be more important than Xavier's, who is 5th time removed? I don't know.
Okay. All right. So is there anything else you want to say to the people in terms of encouraging words, in terms of your journey so far?
I would just say that if you are If you're having that pulling in your spirit and in your soul about something, follow it. Because I was pulled. My spirit was pulled every day of my adopted life about who do I belong to. And if you get, if you have that reoccurring question, follow the question. The answer will come. For me, it came in almost 40 years, but it will come.
All right, appreciate it.
Thank you.
I just had to get a grip. Okay.
All right.
So let's talk a little bit of the history about this church.
So yeah.
So if you want to go, brother.
So yeah, I just want to give you a little bit of history on the church because they talk about Thomas Kincaid being married in the church and some other history, but I want to talk about family. And our family have actually my great uncle was married in this church. He happened to come get married in this church, and it's ironically enough, if you get the records, they recorded most of the marriages. So on the records, the official records, they have his name listed, but they don't have his wife's name. And so I was in a meeting, and they asked me, well, how come they don't have his wife's listed? Because we know he was married. There's a record of it. I said, because his wife was a white woman, or she had white skin. She was Italian, and her name was Betty. And so it's interesting when we talk about history, but we don't tell the whole history. And partly, again, these are just remnants of things of our ancestor that they'd done so that we would know. He came up here and get married in this church for a reason, and he knew what would happen. But now it's etched in history. It's etched in their records. And again, we're looking at that church because it belongs to us.
Okay, so can you explain to us a little bit about what time and era this was? Because you mentioned they were, I guess, interracial couple. I mean, was it legal at that time for interracial couples to be together?
Right. So understanding California, they say a lot of things about California. They claim California was a free state, right? And we know that was depending on who you asked, because they did have slaves in California. However, California was the most acceptance during the time, although you still had Southerners that came here with their ways. And so, yes, it was legal for you to marry someone other than, if you were African American or black, someone other than the black person. You can marry a white woman. But the fact that here in Coloma, they didn't recognize who would have been my auntie, my great aunt by marriage, they didn't recognize her in the records, tells you what this park and some was built on after we had to leave the town. He came back up here to occupy this building to have his marriage in this building, which is recorded. And this is my great uncle. Okay. Again, if we're looking at the generations of Burgesses, so his father was here, and before him it was his grandfather that was here. So that's 3 generations of Burgesses, and him knowing the history as well. But looking at some of their pain, they didn't talk about a lot of things, but things were written down, and things were done, such as getting married in here and knowing what the outcome would be, so that we would know.
Who do you think should be receiving these reparations? What's going on right now with the eligibility question?
And see, understanding the eligibility, and I don't know why it has to be that complicated, and a lot of times what people have done is they compare this story to reparation. This story is about restoration, this particular story. Reparations is what was done for every other family. This is repair and making this family whole, but reparation, let's look at it as a whole. And there is definitely lineage, and we look at, if you ask me, it's going to be personal, because I know what they did to my great-grandfather, okay, and my great-great-grandfather. And let me ask, or I'll just ask the question this. My grandfather served in World War I. Let's put that in and unpack that and put that in perspective. My grandfather served in World War I, yet his father was a slave. They owned land in this town, and it was taken away. So if you ask me about reparations, it affects me personally, and we have direct lineage, and we can tell you how we were affected by it, and when it comes about generational wealth. And so that lineage runs deep. But we understand that there's repair for a lot of black African American folks, but those that were here and that are descendants of slaves would get the reparations. There's lineage based. I believe it's lineage. That's not to say that we can't put something in place to correct the other wrongs, but if we're talking about reparations, let's break that down. What does that mean? How did it affect descendants of slaves that were here on American soil?
All right, so once again, for the people, how are you two related one more time?
This is my cousin.
Yes.
This is your cousin.
Yes.
Okay.
So when he was speaking about his great uncle being married in this church, that's my grandfather, Edgar Todd Burgess.
So basically, my grandfather and her grandfather were brothers.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So that we are descendants, direct descendants. You know, and so when you look at that, there were 3 brothers.
There were 3.
There were 3 brothers in this
Marion.
town, and so they were direct descendants that didn't get anything. Matter of fact, they got kicked off their land and kicked off the orchards. You know, and so something that paved the way. And just if you put it in perspective, my grandfather serving in World War I, only to come back here and ultimately lose the land because of eminent domain. And his father was a slave that worked hard, that planted orchards by hand. And we're left with nothing? I don't think any American would say that that's fair or equitable or right. When you look at the same entities that were around that have built generational wealth. And so if you ask me that question, yeah, there has to be restoration, reparations, and repair for the harm that has been done to direct descendants.
All right. One more.
It's not if.
When.
It's when the land comes back, it will be returned at some point.
So my question to you is, so you said you don't want people to get off the property. So what kind of repair would that be for you and your family? Would that be in terms of cash payments, an apology? Like, what does that look like for you?
So yeah, I mean, for us, again, the people that are living here had nothing to do with what happened, what the government allowed. So that's obviously going to be some type of restoration that comes from the government. Now, we had orchards, but it's not these people here that are living here today. And so, yeah, I mean, so you have to put, and there's no number that can quantify the harm and the damage and the trauma. Not to mention the trauma of that they don't want to bring this history out. They want to continue to suppress it. So it's ongoing trauma. And I can't put a dollar amount on it. I don't think any dollar amount will suffice, but there's got to be something. And there's expert economists that can talk about it. But if I equate our receipts from our great-grandfather when he was carting down $60 a week in peaches, and you quantify that for since 1885 and all the orchards we lost, where we could own manufacturing and distribution companies that we don't have, that's a whole lot of money. Close to $1 billion. That's just for one family. So, I don't know. I can't put a number. I can't put a dollar amount on it.
Okay. Now, I forgot to actually get your name. So if you don't mind giving us your name, and then have the people see where they could reach out to you and so forth. Any organizations you're involved with, etc.
Sure. I'm Matthew Burgess. And so basically I don't have an organization other than the African American Gold Rush Foundation that my brother and I have started to help tell true history. And so that foundation will be a place where you can find stories like ours and get the background information that will tell true history.
All right. Appreciate it.
Matthew, I heard another one of your relatives saying that you guys tried to get your products in one of these stores out here. Did you ever get your barbecue sauce and your cornbread mix in the Coloma?
Nope.
No, I think it was the school district I was trying to get the barbecue sauce in. And for whatever reason, it didn't happen. But that's okay. Our people were resilient, and they don't give up. And if had they, we wouldn't be here today. And so we just keep pushing. We'll continue to build, and we'll get what's rightfully ours.
All right. And so what's the name of your barbecue sauce and your company?
Hey, we had to rebuild a legacy, so it's Burgess Brothers.
Burgess Brothers, okay. And don't you guys have like a website or something? You guys do, right?
BurgessBrothers.com.
BurgessBrothers.com.
There you
All right.
go.